going to do today is talk about the demise of the Aral Sea and other human-made disasters. Now, first of all, what is the Aral Sea and where is it? Well, I guess where is more important than what it is. The Aral Sea was once considered the fourth largest lake on the planet. And we're talking about our planet, in case you had doubts. Now, the Aral Sea is located in Russia, or used to be Russia. It's actually now somewhere near Kazakhstan, which is one of the Russian republics. And this is just one adventure that I want to talk to you about, or one mishap of the environment amongst two or three that I'm going to cover today. And the title of actually my talk is The Demise of the Aral Sea and Other Human-Made Disasters. And I want to begin with the Aral Sea because this shows you that humans can actually make a big impact on the planet Earth. And this particular area you can actually see by satellite, as well as another area that I'm going to talk to you about. And we're going to see the problems associated with it and how humans have caused this catastrophe. Okay, let me read you something about the Aral Sea. Come on in if you want. We're talking about the Aral Sea.
You're just out of class.
Oh, well, this is just a lecture. If you want to come, you're welcome. Okay. Well, anyway, let me continue. The Aral Sea was once the fourth biggest inland sea in the world, with abundant fish resources and a busy shipping trade between its northern port of Alsk and the river ports of the Amu Darja. That's the name of a river, the Amu Darja. Some as far as distance as Pakistan. The sea provided a healthy livelihood for several 100,000 people. The Aral Sea surface was 66,100 square kilometers, which is pretty big, with an average depth of 16.1 meters, which is roughly somewhere around 50 feet, and a maximum depth of 68 meters, which is around near 200 feet. Salt content was 1%. Now, I should point out that the oceans are roughly 3.5% salt, okay? And the Red Sea is roughly 4%. And I should point out, if you want other reference points, the Dead Sea in Israel is roughly 32%. You measure 32, which is almost 10 times that of the ocean. And, of course, the lake in Salt Lake City is 25%. So it's roughly 1/4 of the water there is salt. Now, in the 60s, the flow of water into the sea, we're talking about the Aral Sea, began to drop alarmingly. Upstream irrigation streams, the growing of rice and cotton consumed like a sponge more than 90% of the natural flow of water. As a result, the sea surface has declined. 27,000 square kilometers of former sea bottom became dry surface, okay? So, this is essentially what I'm going to talk to you about today, and I have lots of pictures to show you, and this just shows you how humans can actually cause a severe problem. Now, not only is the water drying up, but a lot of diseases, especially throat cancer, is prominent in that area, because when they exposed the salt, which was in the sand, you get a lot of windstorms, and people that live near the cities nearby or live in the cities are being exposed to the salt and other heavy metal contaminants, which have been known to cause throat cancer. So not only is this a problem of diminished water, diminished fish, and not to mention diminished incomes of various people who had their livelihoods depend on fishing, but we also deal now with throat cancer. Okay, so what I'm going to do is show you some pictures of the Aral Sea, and I'm going to show you two sets of pictures. One is from a video presentation that I made, not a video, a PowerPoint presentation that I had made a while ago, and another is just a general information with some real frightening pictures. So I'm going to show you this first. Okay, but before I get to that, I just want to show you a listing of natural disasters by region throughout the world. Starting from 1985 to 1999, the world has seen a lot of natural disasters. You may say, well, are these natural? Well, the answer is yes and no. I know that's a big wishy-washy answer, but some of us have been able to cause these types of catastrophes, of which the Aral Sea is one of them. Now, why am I jumping to this list first? Because I just want to show you something to make my point. If you notice on this chart, on the picture on the left, you will see that 77% of global deaths, and we mean in Asia. Another 10% take place in South America, and then the rest is divided up with the rest of the world, including Europe and the United States. And a lot of these deaths are due to environmental catastrophes, such as too much rain, droughts, and these rain and droughts are caused by global warming, which is, of course, is influenced by our gluttonous greed for oil-based products and other carbon-based energy sources, which are helping to fuel our catastrophes. Now, if you look on the right, you will see the percentages of different types of situations, such as earthquakes, windstorms, floods, etc. The problem with this is, of course, we don't make the wind, we don't make the floods, and we don't cause the volcanoes to erupt. But what we do is we make the conditions such that when a volcano erupts, we have a windstorm or a flood, the damage is multiplied by many times because of what we've done to the land, which will ensure the deaths of many humans. Now, let me get back to the Aral Sea. If we look at this chart here, we see on the top it says, will the Aral Sea disappear forever? And the first report here, let me show you where it is. The Aral Sea is located between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. And as you can see here, I'll point it with the arrow. Right over there, sort of 50-50. Okay? Here we have the Caspian Sea. And by the way, just for your information, Moscow is way up there. And I have another picture of Moscow so you can get some idea where Moscow is in relationship to the Aral Sea. And again, this used to be the 4th largest sea on the planet. And now, of course, it's being diminished to next to nothing. Over here, we see another chart. I'm trying to show you some various types. As you see, I'm going back out. And as I'm taking a plane or a satellite, I'm going up and up so you can see more of the land. Here we see the Aral Sea. Here we see Kazakhstan. Here we see Tajikistan. Then we see Afghanistan and Iran. So this gives you some idea where it's located. And then we have still another one. Here's another picture. We're going out. The Aral Sea is right there. And then here we have Iran, the Ukraine, and then we have Europe. Here we have Poland, Germany, etc. So we have Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and then we have the Scandinavian countries, and the Aral Sea is right down here. So this gives you a general location of this sea. Now notice the size. This map was taken before, or this picture comes from a picture taken before it shrunk in size. Now, let me show you this. Here we see a boat in the middle of the desert. Well, actually, this is not a model. This is a real fishing boat in the middle of the Aral Sea. Isn't that incredible? What do we see? Boats, actual life-size boats in the middle of a desert. Interesting, and I'm going to explain this to you in a few minutes. Okay, here we see a satellite picture of the Aral Sea, and this will explain what has happened. In September of '89, the Aral Sea looked like this. You see a lot of land. And actually, I should point out that the demise of the water in the Aral Sea began in 1960. But as you can see, we see a lot of water. This was taken in 1989. 14 years later, you see it now. You see this area, which is relatively shallow, and over here you have some more deep water. And that's about the extent of the former Aral Sea, and that was taken about a year ago. Isn't that incredible? Okay? And all this was done because of humans, and I'll explain this in a minute. What have we done to cause this, and how can we actually stop it? And I'll just say briefly, one of the answers is to end greed and lower the human population on the planet, and I'll explain that in a few minutes. Okay, now, what exactly happened to the Aral Sea? Well, if you look at this picture here, notice we see two rivers. This river is called the Sur Darya River, and this one is called the Amu Darya River. Okay? Notice that they both go into the Aral Sea. However, what you don't see on this picture are lands used to grow cotton. Okay? Cotton is being grown along these areas here. Okay? Cotton is a very water-intensive crop. Now, evidently, it didn't rain much in this area. So what do we have to do? Well, in order to get water, you have to irrigate it. And where are you going to get your irrigation water from? Well, you don't have it in the wells, and it doesn't rain a lot. The next best place is to get it from the rivers which feed the Aral Sea. Okay? So these two famous rivers, the Sur Darya and the Aral Darya, are the ones feeding the Aral Sea with water, okay? Now, if you take away this water, what's going to happen? The sea is going to dry up, and that's exactly what happened. Now, how did this happen, and why did this happen? Well, it happened for the following reason. During the communist era, when Russia was communist, remember it was called Soviet Union when they were a union composed of about 17 republics? They were kind of broke, okay? The communist system evidently didn't work. So what they had were these 5-year programs trying to help increase the financial situation of the Soviet Union. So they figured out if they can raise a cash crop, remember, what is a cash crop compared to a regular crop? Well, a cash crop is one that really does not help the people who grow it, but all it does is help their bank accounts. A regular crop, such as food items, are not considered cash crops because those are food. But the only foods which are really cash crops are actually coffee beans and perhaps bananas. And of course, a non-cash crop is cotton. Now, I don't know if you know of anybody here who's able to eat cotton. Of course, the closest we have to that is cotton candy, but I don't think that sort of passes for cotton, okay? However, the point is, again, a cash crop is just to make money for the various people that grow it. And of course, they can't use it themselves because it's mainly grown for export. So anyway, what happened is they were raising cotton, and they didn't even think about draining the rivers to raise this cotton, okay? So this is why this actually happened. And again, I'm going to show you another presentation. Here we see another picture of boats in the Aral Sea. And notice they're rusty because they're falling apart. And of course, it's this type of area where you see a lot of sand. Now, what do you do in a situation? What if you want fish and there's no fish available? Suppose you have a craving. Man, I got to have fish. I got to have fish. What are you going to do? Well, okay, here it comes. You get yourself a pole, you sit on a park bench, and you do what this fellow's doing. He's fishing for land trout. Now, it's a very good species, very expensive. There's one on the ground. I happen to, I brought one with me, very expensive stuff, so I'm going to have it. See, land trout.
So they're enslaving?
Yeah, well, yeah, you gotta be lucky. So if you need fish, you get yourself a pole and you fish. There's nothing like that land trout. I think about $50,000 a pound. Very expensive. Okay, now what I'm going to do is, before I do this, I want to show you another presentation of the Aral Sea. Then I'm going to get into the Dead Sea of Israel. Okay, and this will really amaze you. And then we're going to talk about some more disasters. Okay, let's go on to this. Let's see. Yeah, this is the one I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you this presentation. And this will give you a better view of what I'm talking about with statistics. But I just wanted to let you know that this is a real serious problem. And by the way, there was an issue of National Geographic a number of years ago which had a story relating to the demise of the Aral Sea. And anyway, here we see the history, and let me read this to you. I'm not really repeating myself because I'm giving you numbers, but I just wanted to get you excited in the beginning to see what you're in for, and to show you that this is an amazing catastrophe brought upon by human beings on this planet. That's right, the Homo sapiens, which we are all a member of. Okay, anyway, essentially, the Aral Sea is located in Central Asia, and it is shared by 5 relatively new republics, and they're written there. And by the way, notice that they all end in stan. Well, stan, by the way, means place, in case you've ever wondered. Yeah, come on in. You heard of Pakistan, and of course, that means a place, too. And anyway, stan means place. Okay, now, fed by its 2 primary rivers, the Amu Darya and the Sur Darya, okay? And that's what feeds the lake. In the 1960s, the USSR, which no longer exists as such, patrolled the area, and they dedicated themselves to make themselves sufficient in cotton and increase rice production. Well, you know, when you grow things, folks, you need one major thing. And what is it? I'll give you a hint. It's liquid. Water, exactly. fight for water. As a matter of fact, if you've been reading the newspapers and paying attention, it appears that if we have any wars other than fighting for oil, countries will fight for water. And this is what's going on in the Middle East, Syria and Israel, and perhaps Jordan. They're all fighting for water of the Jordan River. And let's hope that does not break out into actual gunfire, but diplomatic ways of solving it. But anyway, just to let you know, in the future it appears that the wars will be over water and not over land and gold and things like this. You know, people got to eat, and you can't eat without water, okay? Anyway, the government officials ordered additional water to be taken from these rivers to feed the cotton thirst, okay? So anyway, what happened was the Russians built an 850-mile central canal, which are called feeder canals, and of course this drained the rivers of the water. Then if you look here, beginning in 1960, the Aral Sea covered roughly 25,500 square miles, okay? And now 50% of the surface area is gone. The volume, by the way, was 1.60 cubic kilometers. You know how much water that is? A kilometer of that way, and that way. You know, a cube will give you a cubic kilometer. Now, for those of you in my class, you should know which is bigger, a kilometer or a mile? A mile. So there's roughly how many kilometers in a mile? 1.6, you're close. 1.6 kilometers per mile. So anyway, a cubic kilometer is about 1.5 miles, actually a little more. I mean, 1.5 kilometers per 1.6 kilometers per mile. Okay? Now, notice this. They irrigated the land. The land increased by 100% the irrigation. The population increased by 140%. Okay? And the salt content was up 300%. Why the salt content? Because the water had a 1% salt, right? So what happens when you lose it? It evaporates. Okay? The salt's going to stay there. And if the salt contains heavy metals, like cadmium and things like this, and you get dry spells, and people breathe the air, which are loaded with the sand and the salt, in which they do, they're subjected to throat cancer, which has been on the increase. Okay? Now, again, here we see two pictures in 1960 on the left and 1995 on the right. It's roughly the same. The area, notice how this box is roughly the same square mileage as this. You see it? But look at the lake. It's almost diminished by more than half. You see it? Okay? Notice that between 1927 and 1960, the average annual flow was 55 cubic kilometers. Now, between 75 and 85, it dropped to only 10 cubic kilometers, which is 1/5. Isn't that incredible? All because they have to feed the cotton plants. Okay? Now, let's take a look what we mean by this stadium. Currently, it says more than 20,000 square kilometers of the seafloor are exposed. This is Raymond J. Stadium, home of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Okay? Let's see what that says. Notice that it takes 11 of these football fields to equal only 1 kilometer. Okay? So in other words, it takes a lot of football fields equivalent to equal that amount. Now here we see a boat in part of the Aral Sea, and then we see many boats on the right. Look at that. Now you could ask, well, how come the boats just stayed there? Because evidently when the fishing dried up, the people who owned the boats didn't want to take them anywhere, and the water kept going down, 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 and this is what you get. Again, if you want to fish in sand, you'll have to get either land trout or sand trout. Okay, now, what are the effects of this depletion? Well, the fields are becoming salt-laden, requiring more irrigation to achieve the same production levels. Because why? Because evidently, unless you raise crops genetically or acclimate them to salty water, which, by the way, can be done. Israel, by the way, is trying to grow crops using salt water. And, of course, you can do that, but you have to acclimate the crops. You can't just do it overnight. They have to adjust slowly to higher salinities. And that will cause, maybe that will give us better crops. But anyway, what happens here is, as the salt increases, you need more water and more water. And what happens there? Well, it reduced the effects on the climate, causing hotter summers and colder winters. So, what is the point I'm trying to make here? Well, the point is that not only is this a catastrophe from the point of view of the fish and of the populations that depend on the fish, but the climate, okay? As I tell my students in the environmental classes, and for those of you who know me, I'm a real hellraiser about the environment. This is why I get upset when they cut down the trees or when they do any sort of environmental disruption. We have these effects. And global warming, we've all noticed now, is real. As a matter of fact, today happens to be October 25th. Well, what's it like outside? You could almost go swimming, right? All you need is a bathing suit. You'll be in the pool, of course. And you can go swimming, okay? That's right. I think it's close to 70 out there, isn't it? Yeah. It's kind of warm for this time of year, right? So I don't know. Did we finish summer or are we beginning summer? Well, I wouldn't be surprised if in 10 years we start having palm trees out there, okay? Not to be cynical, but I am. But anyway, and that's because of what we're doing here. Now, can the effects of the Aral Sea, what we're doing, be shown here, right here in the middle of the Chicago area? And the answer is yes, because the whole climate, we all depend on the same climate, right? We all breathe the same air, right? It all gets moved around by the wind currents. And of course, the climate is supposed to, you have different areas of the planet which have their own general climate, but nevertheless, it's changing, okay? Now, let's go back here to the third point where we see spread of toxic dusts other than climate problems from dried out bed and deterioration of regional climate due to depletion of the sea. These have caused, in addition to cancer, they cause anemia, tuberculosis, and allergies, which are picking up. Now, one of the things that's not mentioned here, which is picking up in Los Angeles area, is asthma is picking up, okay? And they wonder why. Well, it's because of our mishandling of the environment, okay? Asthma is picking up because we're burning more gas, more gasoline, we're putting out more carbon dioxide, and obviously more dust and more irritants, which are making people sick, especially children. In the Los Angeles area, I think 25% of black kids have asthma or something like this. So it doesn't seem to appear that we're actually taking this serious. But I'll tell you, I'm trying to make this fact known and raise hell about it, and maybe before it's too late, we can do something about it. Notice allergies are picking up because of this, especially those people that live in the area, okay? Okay, in addition to these diseases, they also lack potable water or drinking water, okay, which has led to birth defects and miscarriages, okay? And of course, this water problem, people are going to find water wherever they can. They can pick up typhoid fever or viral hepatitis, okay? And of course, that's bad too, not to mention tuberculosis. And here, you see that too, throat cancer and TB. Tuberculosis is 3 times the national average, okay? So what's that tell you? Well, in their quest for money, put it another way, in their quest because of their greed, people are getting sick and dying. And not only the people, but the whole environment, okay? Now, here we see some more pictures, which I think this should wake you up, a little sobering here. In the 60s, the Soviets focused on using water for economical purposes only. No systems are implemented to manage and monitor water, okay? And this is what I raised hell about. I thought that our president, the President of the United States, should really do something about this. Instead of fighting the so-called Cold War, we should help fight the environmental wars, okay? Which means we should have helped them get on track instead of building nuclear bombs. In fact, both sides built up nuclear bombs. And I believe, instead of building nuclear bombs, a better way to defend us was trying to help the Russians solve their water problem. But of course, to me, common sense never reigns. It's always bombs and guns. But there's no charisma in helping countries get better themselves. Is that correct? We got a bomb them. That's charisma. Okay. Now, get a load of this. It says also people are forced to drink directly from feeding rivers, which are heavily contaminated with high levels of salt and bacterial contamination, and pesticides and heavy metals, okay? Hey, Joe, give me a glass of water. You might have had pesticides now, I'm thirsty out here. But why don't you just call it a pesticide special? Go to a bar, give me a pesticide special there. Okay. Then, lack of sewage systems. This is causing sewage to be dumped close to untreated, and backing up into the river, and then of course that is the main drinking source. So what does it mean? People are drinking sewage, contaminated water, okay? Now, let's look at the fishing industry. What do we see here? Well, fishing and shipping industries, as well as related activities, have collapsed. Unemployment levels are extremely high. How's that for a day's catch? 6 fish, folks. Interesting? Okay? So, we're also screwing up with the food chain, not only of the organisms in the sea, but of the humans, because those of you who know, poorer countries depend on fish protein instead of meat protein from cows, which is actually better for you if the fish aren't contaminated. But here, you have how many people in the picture? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's like 1 fish. No, 7 people in the picture. So there's a little over 1 fish per, less than 1 fish per person. See it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, there's 7 fish too. Let's count. That's 6 fish. Doesn't matter. Okay, I think there's 6 fish. All right. So again, cotton and rice also suffered because of the soil, the salt in the soil, and this diminishes yield. As I mentioned before, you cannot raise crops on salty water. However, the only way to do that, and it can be done, is if you acclimate them like they're doing in Israel. And they're trying to raise crops with salty water. Okay, what can we do? Well, one of the things we can do that's not on here is to raise hell. Okay, I'm a real hell raiser, if those of you who know me by now. And we have to make these problems known. Now, if I were ahead of the EPA or the United Nations, I would do something about it. But there's not much I can do except really raise hell and tell the governments and the president, whoever he is, to do something about this, because this really affects us. Even though it's thousands of miles away, it's still important for us, okay? And now, notice in 1995, government leaders, a set amount of land for cotton would be reduced and large amounts of water would be pumped back into the Aral Sea. However, the government also indicated that the welfare of cotton farmers must come first, which means, to hell with the environment, we got to make sure our farmers have enough money to live, and if that means destroying the environment, that's okay. That's what it means. And our government, by the way, does the same thing when it comes to oil-based fuels. Okay, here we see maybe some hope. In March of '92, republics of the basin agreed to equal rights of water use as well as responsibility for its conservation. Few measures have been developed to achieve these goals. Okay. Now, one more: conflicts over sharing of river water is bringing recovery efforts to a standstill. Okay. Again, what did I tell you? One of the greatest causes of warfare will be over water. You see it? So these republics are trying to get the most water they can, and of course they're going to have conflicts. Notice too, it says here that Kyrgyzstan depends on hydropower for most energy. So what does that mean? Well, it depends on water to be supplied by power stations. In other words, to power power stations. The water goes down, turns a turbine. And in order to do that, you have to build a dam. Now, I myself hate dams. Why? Because they're very destructive. In order to get a reservoir, you have to destroy a lot of land. So you fill up that land with water, so the water will go down the sluice and turn the turbine. And this is very bad for a number of reasons. Number one, you're going to cause sedimentation at the bottom of the dam. 2, you're going to get rising salinity rate because of evaporation. And 3, you destroy a lot of land in order to make these dams. So I say dam the dams. Now, notice hydropower, that signifies electricity, right? So what's the problem we have? We have a world problem. It's energy in the form of electricity. So what's the solution? Well, I came up with a solution. We depend on solar power, okay? And perhaps in another lecture, I'll tell you what we can do about that. Solar power. There is a way to solarize the whole planet and make peace in the Middle East. And this is my idea. We can have peace in the Middle East by allowing Israel to develop solar power plants with their technology by using photovoltaic cells and by using the Arab labor and the Arab sand to make the photovoltaic cells. Anyway, that's just one of my ideas, but I'll talk about that later. Okay, now let's look Bank alone has provided more than $470 million. Now, we've spent, if you figure out that the war in Iraq is costing $200 billion, that's roughly 400 times that, right? Something, am I right? 400 times this amount of money. So it seems to me that we are prioritizing the wrong priority, to put it bluntly. And even if we gave them $1 billion to help, that would make a big difference instead of sending it to Iraq. And this is just something that gets to me. Every time I see money, values, it seems like $470 million is a paltry sum considered to the amount of money we just wasted killing people and looking for excuses to invade other countries. That's the way I feel. You might disagree, but that's the way I feel. Okay? And also, one more thing, it says the Executive Committee of the Interstate Council for the Aral Sea created and funded primarily by World Bank, focusing on a program that will develop regional water resources management strategy. So if this works, that's all fine and dandy. But nevertheless, as you can see, we have a serious problem. Okay, so anyway, that's what I wanted to talk about here. And, well, let's get a conclusion. Here, let me just do this thing. Recent studies of the Aral Sea problem have found that the Aral Sea is a biological entity, and it's an illusion to think that it can be restored. Most scientists believe that the Aral Sea cannot ever be as it was. The best they hope for is some sort of stabilization and survival of the river's two deltas. Okay? This is what I think. However, there's nothing we can do about it now, and that's a problem. Okay, so much for the Aral Sea. I think I've given you some information that I think you've never seen before. Is that correct? All this because of humans. Now, let me show you another catastrophe in the making that we really don't talk much about. Okay, let me go back to this. Going back to my original presentation. We're going to now talk about the Dead Sea. I like that, real fancy way here. Okay. What area is this, folks? Does anybody know? That's the Dead Sea in Israel. Now, it used to be that the Dead Sea covered all this area here. See it? Okay? This area, by the way, is called the tongue of a Lashon in Hebrew. It looks like a tongue. I was there in the late 60s, and all this was covered with water, with the exception of this area called the tongue. Now look at it. This was taken by satellite. See it? So here we have another problem, the Dead Sea. Now, what's wrong with the Dead Sea? Okay. First of all, you know, I once told a joke, and my brother said, boy, Dave, that joke was so old, it was around when the Dead Sea was just sick. Now, the Dead Sea essentially is in central Israel. Okay? Well, it's in central Israel, but it borders Jordan, okay? And it is fed by the... Yeah, I'm going to show you this first. Okay, it is fed by the Jordan River. Here we see the Dead Sea. Up here we have Tel Aviv and the West Bank, and up above we have the Sea of Galilee, which you can't see on this map. Up here, the Sea of Galilee is fed by the Jordan River, which goes into the Dead Sea here, okay? Now, one thing that the Dead Sea has that the other countries don't have here is the fact that they have a lot of minerals in there, such as potash, okay? And what happens is the scientists thought, well, we can give extra money to Israel by letting them mine for potash, which is fertilizer and for other uses. So it just so happens that since, remember I told you this has about 32% salinity, since it has so much salinity and a lot of chemicals, let's use them, okay? So what they've done, they decided to mine these minerals from the lake. Now, you know, I realize we don't need all these lights. Shut one off. There. And I have here a chart of Israel that I wanted to show you that I got in Israel a number of years ago. And if you can look at it, over here on the top we see the Sea of Galilee, and it's 1990 actually, back 14 years ago. I picked this up in Israel when I was there a few years ago. Here we have the Dead Sea the way it looks when this part is not being mined. But over here you can see how shallow it is. Where you see this dark area means pretty deep. Over here you can see it's not so deep. You can almost walk in here and still have your head above the water level. So this is another catastrophe in the making that the industry called Dead Sea Works are taking out the potash from here, and you can actually see it from a satellite. The effects of humans. Can you see it? Isn't that incredible? This is one of the most incredible pictures taken by satellite. What do you make of that? That's something, isn't it? So you see, human-made disasters are happening all because of the greed factor. Now, why do I say the greed factor? Because as we've seen in the Aral Sea, they need cotton. Why do they need cotton? So they can get money to support themselves. But I think, though, that they can find other ways of doing it. I think they just wanted to load their bank coffers up with money and disregarding the effect of the environment. And it's the same here with Israel. As we can see right here, a catastrophe in the making. And this is a real serious problem. And what can be done about something like that? Well, let me show you what the Israelis are proposing. And I myself think that if it works, it would be fine. But if it doesn't work, they're going to mess up the ecosystem. And by the way, just one word about this picture taken from a satellite. The quality is so good that you can actually make out the individual homes in Tel Aviv, which is down here. Isn't that incredible? You can actually make out some of the here's Tel Aviv right there, individual buildings. Isn't that incredible? It's a very good quality photo. And this was taken over 14 years ago. So anyway, I just thought I'd share that with you. This is taken from a satellite. Okay. Now, over here, we see one of the uses of the Dead Sea. We see these people taking mud baths, so to speak, okay? This mud is loaded with minerals, and it's good for you, okay? And evidently, it supplies minerals to the body, and you see their smiling faces. They're having a good time there. Yes, sir, getting all muddy. Perfect way to spend an afternoon. Enjoying the fruits of what's left of the Dead Sea. And now, let's go back here. If we see in this picture on the right, we're going to see the proposal for the pipeline going from the Dead Sea up here with this area by the Lashon, again, which means tongue, down to the Gulf of Aqaba, which, by the way, if you're in Israel, you call this the Gulf of Eilat. If you live in Jordan, you call it the Gulf of Aqaba, because Aqaba is the city on the Jordan side, and Eilat, which is the equivalent of Miami Beach in the U.S., over here. I was in Eilat a few times. And so this would be called the Gulf of Eilat if you were in Israel. Now, if we look on the left, what do we see? Well, this is not a car, folks. What do you think this is? A boat. Now, is this reminiscent of the Aral Sea? Okay, so here we have now two seas turning to deserts. Okay. Now, I don't know if I told you this, but deserts aren't so bad for one reason. You know why you can't starve in the desert? Because of all the sand which is there. Mainly baloney, right? Okay, anyway, so we can see this picture too is reminiscent. Now, so I just told you about the Dead Sea. Now let me just tell you briefly about a couple other types of environmental mishaps that we're associated with. Yeah.
What's the pipeline for?
Oh, the pipeline, what that's going to do is they hope to get water. What they want to do is transfer water from the Gulf of Aqaba all the way up to the Dead Sea.
Oh.
They're going to have to pump it. That's why they have this pipeline. That's going to be a hell of a job, isn't it? It's good on paper, but if it's going to work, I don't know. They'll probably run into problems, especially terrorism. Terrorists might destroy the pipeline just for the hell of it, okay? All right? They cut their own throats. But that's why. You're right, I didn't mention that. Very good. I'm glad you asked that. And by the way, here's a close-up. Here's a larger area, which, of course, down below is Egypt over here. This is the Demise Straits. Egypt is here, and Eilat is right over there, along as well as Aqaba. By the way, Aqaba at night looks pretty nice. I was in Eilat. You can see it across the way. It's really lit up. It's real nice, at least from looking at it from far away. anyway, they're going to transfer, the theory is to get the water from down here up there, and that will replenish the sea. Now that might also screw up with the wildlife there too, because you have certain organisms which acclimated themselves, such as bacteria called thermohaline bacteria. These are bacteria which, I'm sorry, these are urehaline bacteria, which means they can live with a wide variety of salt. They can live in high salt concentrations. Hence they're called halophilic bacteria, which live in the salt. You know, there are some organisms which live in the salt, but of course the salt will kill most organisms, and that's why it's called the Dead Sea. Now, so much for that. Let me discuss a few other types of problems. As I mentioned in the beginning, you can have droughts, floods, and other types of mishaps caused by humans, including this tornado. And why will we have more tornadoes? Because we're screwing up with the weather. And we're burning more fossil fuels, which are putting out more carbon dioxide, and one thing leads to the other. So, this is a good example. Now, this is a good example of something that may be caused by humans. If you notice, weather changes have been occurring quite often now. Most of them, I believe, are caused by humans. Okay, and the scientists really believe this. Now, is there anything we can do about this? All these problems? Yes, as I mentioned earlier, first of all, we have to control the human population, and something else, which I don't even think we in the rich countries think about, we have to make the other countries more livable for themselves so they don't have to cut, chop, and dig and sell everything they have. Doesn't that make sense? Because we are all going to pay the price. Do you agree? And this is the situation. Now, there are many books also written about these problems caused by humans, and one of them was put out by the World Watch Institute. This one came out in 2001. It is called Unnatural Disasters. Okay? And this was written by a woman named Janet Abramovitz. And I should point out that the World Watch Institute is one I've been associated with now for many years. They're an environmental think tank, and they always write books and papers and magazines about the environment. Okay? And 6 times a year, they have a little white paper like this. It's called the World Watch paper, and it's about some environmental issue. And I read every word, and I underline them, I highlight them, I do a lot of information here. And if we look here, this is a particular type of chart in the book where they show you different types of catastrophic events. And they mention about major droughts. All the stars represent droughts. These little squiggly lines mention increased precipitation and floods. The dark lines along the coast mean these people there are vulnerable to sea level rise, which will result in flooding and demise of the cities. We see fires here, which indicates more forest fires. Okay, and then we see little black dots, which mean these are cities vulnerable to sea level rise. So as you see, we have a lot of problems here. Okay, and it also mentions the number of cities in these zones which are subject to destruction because of our catastrophes caused by humans. In addition to this, by the way, there's another book written by a woman also associated with the World Watch. It's called The Pillar of Sand, Can the Irrigation Miracle Last? And it's written by a woman named Sandra Postal, who's an expert on water quality issues. And I'm reading this one too. This is a book which shows you about water. So you see there are many books on the subject of the catastrophic effects of the environment. But perhaps one of the greatest books to come out about the environment just came out. This book is written by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. It came out in 2004, and it is called Crimes Against Nature. And I'll read you the subtitle. Again, I don't want to get political, but I didn't write this. He wrote it. It's subtitled How George W. Bush and his corporate pals are plundering the country and hijacking our democracy. It's mainly based on the environmental damage of the present administration. Now, throughout the world, if you look closely, you're going to find books States, but all over the world, are more interested in their buddies and keeping themselves rich than in doing anything about the environment. Okay, that's why all these books are written. Now, one other thing about all these books written about the environmental policies of these bad leaders is the fact that these leaders are so bad that they help destroy the environment by making these people write books about them, so they have to cut down more trees to make the paper so more people will read about the damages they're doing in the first place. You see the irony of that? So you see, if all these politicians, and one I have in mind, who, by the way, has the same name as a plant, but I won't mention what it is, he has caused, really, if you look in the papers and you look on the internet, I think there's more than 50 books written about his policies as well as the environmental policy. So the fact that he's perceived to be so inept is causing the destruction of the environment so more people can read about his ineptness. And you know, it's kind of funny, but I think it's true, and this unfortunately can be true in many cases. And let me see if I brought another book here to show you. I had something else, but I didn't. Okay, I left it upstairs. There's one more book that I mentioned to my class today that I wanted to mention because this is sort of an irony. I have another book called The Hot Zone, written by Richard Preston. It was about the Ebola breakout or outbreak in Reston, Virginia. And the book is about 300 pages, except in the beginning of the book, there's about 15 pages that just have one sentence in it on each page just to make an impression. It has to do with the hot zone, which is actually the Samarid building located in Fort Detrick, Maryland. Samarid stands for the United States Army Lab, the United States Army Research Institute in Infectious Diseases. Okay, and so it's divided up into 4 levels. Level 1, which is the least contaminated. In other words, you can go in there with just simple clothes. Level 2, you need a certain suit. Level 3, you need a mask and other equipment. And level 4, which is known as the hot zone, that's the zone where you work with these deadly viruses like Ebola. And the point the author is making is that he would write one sentence in each page to show you you're entering level 1, biosafety level 1, biosafety level 2. And as I mentioned to my class, that's like 15 pages all wasted, which could have been used to print other books, you see? Okay, so anyway, that's all essentially I have to say. Does anybody have any questions? Ask away. See, we have a tremendous audience here. No questions? Was this clear to you?
Yeah.
You agree with what I said? I mean, I didn't make any of this stuff up. This is real, honest-to-goodness stuff. And it's a real problem. And so, those of you, in fact, everybody who's here is in my class, just think, if I didn't have any classes, I wouldn't have anybody come, except for one. So it's good. See, that's the advantage of teaching at more than one school. It has a few people. Yes? For Israel?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I really, that's something I really don't know. Let's see. It's a few hundred. It's not very far because you can travel all of Israel, I think, to a Latin from the northern part in about 6 hours. So it's about 150 miles. I don't think it's that long. Well, actually, it says so here. Yeah, I'd say about 150. You see the scale? 25 miles. It's not really that long. I'd say around 150 to 200 miles. So it's not really that long, okay? Because Israel's so small, I'm telling you, you can go from the very top of Israel to a Latin in about 6 hours by driving. About 300 miles.
Pretty flat, too.
Yeah, it's a lot of flat. It's about as big as New Jersey, Israel. All of Israel is about as big as New Jersey. So that's a good question. Yeah, I'd say about 200 miles, no longer. You think?
So they're still proposing it, or?
Yeah, this was recently I got this off the internet. Yeah, they're trying to do something because they know it's in trouble. And as you can see, you can actually see the problem here. See it? From a satellite. Now you can imagine what it looks like now. This was taken 14 years ago. Right? So it's probably a lot less. What does that tell you? We haven't learned much, have we? Now with the political situation there, it's still not so good. Yeah.
Well, there's even like some cosmetic products I know they keep advertising.
Yeah, Lahab, you can get them from the Dead Sea. Yeah, you can buy them.
So
Yeah, therefore they can put it on your skin and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So that must be contributing too.
Well, it's a little bit. mud before you get it outside, but this is highly enriched mud with minerals. Yeah. You can buy it in the store. I think it's ahava, which means love. You can get it, ahava. Go to the cosmetic shop in Marshall Fields or somewhere. Anything else? Okay, well, thanks for coming, guys. Thank you. Hope you learned something. Okay. They like this man. He played that real fancy noise. Okay, so much for that. All right. We'll see you.
Going public is a very expensive process. Not only the registration and raising the money, but the after-public costs. Average corporation that goes public between $500,000 and $700,000 a year. Legal fees, accounting fees, director liability insurance. IPOs are very important for companies to gather large amounts of money, but it is not a hard. Think of it only as a money source for growth. The investment banker follows the investment banker in additional public money sources. The investment banker follows all of the same rules as the venture capitalist. He's a professional. They play hardball. They know how to make money. They ask tough, penetrating questions. But they're different in two ways. First, is that they don't invest their own money. Venture capitalists raise pools of funds